The final reckoning of Ethan Hunt is finally here. That means we have 8 Mission Impossible movies to rank from worst to best. And I'm not going to lie, this might be one of the hardest rankings I've ever had to do, because about 6 of these movies I absolutely passionately love, and 2 of them I just think are pretty solid action movies to ones that I really enjoy. So this was one of the toughest rankings I've ever had to do. Please leave your thoughts down below. We are not going to agree on this ranking, and that is okay. Film is subjective. I can't wait to see your guys' thoughts down below in the comment section. But without further ado, let's run this, hopefully one last time. We should not have any more Ethan Hunt Mission Impossible films after this, but time will tell. Down at my number 8 is a film that I think a lot more people are coming around to, but for me, it's still the weakest Mission Impossible movie, and that is Mission Impossible 2. Now, there's a lot that has been said about this movie. I think some people do appreciate some of the more simplistic aspects of the story here, but for me, I find Mission Impossible 2 to be a little bit too John Woo, which is not bad for anything. I've just never personally been a gigantic John Woo fan. I can appreciate and like certain things about it, but I never felt that his style really fits for the Mission Impossible world. But that is one thing that I have always appreciated about this franchise, is that each and every one of the movies, when they came out, is kind of the time frame of how blockbusters were changing, and some of them feel for that. Mission Impossible 2 came out at a point where this type of blockbuster was one of the most successful type of things to make, and it makes sense for why they went in this direction. It just never really works for me. I think some of the avenues that I think are better in this is I think Thandie Newton deserved a little bit more of credit than deserved here. I wish we would have gotten more of her in the future. Ethan Hunt's awesome. I think he's just totally highly stylized in here, and it's a very vastly different Mission Impossible from the first movie, and in a way I appreciate it, but at the same time I kind of find Mission Impossible 2 to be a little bit forgettable besides some of the action set pieces, and it's not one that I really ever care to go back to. But now we get into my number 7, which might be blasphemy for some people, but it is the first Mission Impossible. This is not a movie I grew up with. This was not the first Mission Impossible I ever saw, nor is it one that I ever really have love or fond to go back to, but it is one that, just like Mission Impossible 2, I appreciate. I appreciate the simplicity of it. Yes, we have the giant action set piece towards the end. Of course, the stunt defying when he's going down and he has to not sweat or drop anything, and it's one of the most clever, like, heist moments in the entire franchise. But for me, this is a movie that I just didn't grow up with. It's not one that I go back to every so often. And while I like what Brian De Palma was making in this, it's not one that's my personal cup of taste. Everything else in this franchise is exactly what I wanted. But what I do really like is that this one is more talkie-talkie spy genre. I like that the dialogue is a little bit heavier in here. I like the fact that Ethan Hunt doesn't know where to go or who to trust. And I love that Jim Phelps is the villain in this overall. For me, Mission Impossible is, in a way, a classic and something that, again, redefined and changed this franchise for what it is. But for me, this is not where I started liking the franchise, and it is a part of me where I go back to and I appreciate. I just never really care to rewatch. That is where we get to my number 6, and I would say 6 and above. I honestly changed this ranking countless times between 6 and 2. Like, this ranking has been ever changing over the last couple of weeks since I had started my rewatches, and then specifically once I had seen Final Reckoning, I started really changing this ranking up by it. And it's just tough because, again, it feels like I'm like ranking my children, which I only have one son, but it feels like you're trying to figure out who is your best kid. And it's so tough, guys, I promise you. But my number 6 is Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, a movie that I want to attend, that I fucking love. I love To the Moon and Back. I love this film. I love basically every Mission Impossible film here on up. And the only reason this is lower is literally just the villain. For me, it's just the villain that keeps this just a tad bit lower. That's it. That's the only reason that my mind could just go to having this lower. And I loved Ghost Protocol. This, for me, was what got me back into the Mission Impossible franchise. This was the one that I watched for the very first time and thought, this is freaking awesome. Brad Bird does a great job. What I really love about his direction specifically, and something that I wish the franchise would have gone back to, is some of the gadgets and how some of the gadgets just stopped working. And I really liked his relationship with Benji in here. And I like Paula Patton in here, who's very underrated. Jeremy Renner's William Brandt should have been in here a little bit more. There's all these different ideas that I absolutely loved. I love all the stunts. Of course, him climbing the building is one of the most iconic set pieces in action history. I'm not going to try and defend why this is here. I'm just telling you that I fucking love Ghost Protocol, and I love every Mission Impossible film going up, and I think this is a stellar movie, and it is very hard to do this ranking. Brings me to my number 5, which may be a little bit of recency bias, and maybe the reason that it's not at my number 6, but the emotions I felt going through this movie were definitely high, and that is Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. I really went back and forth with this being on my 4 or 6. Like, I didn't know where to put it. I genuinely did not know where to put this movie, because for me, I've seen a lot of the mixed reactions. I've seen all the reactions that are the same as me, who absolutely love this and find this to be a perfect finale to Ethan Hunt's Mission Impossible franchise, which I fully agree with. Do not do another one, please. Just go make a different franchise. Go touch something else. Go make a Les Grossman movie, Tom Cruise. I don't need any more Mission Impossible movies. This really felt like the final reckoning for this team, and I loved it. I loved it. Yes, the first 20 to 30 minutes is a little bit slow, but for some reason, I kind of appreciate that. I like that it kind of harkens back and gives some love to some of the older franchise. And in a way, this kind of feels like in tone, Mission Impossible 1, Mission Impossible 3, and Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning, Mission Impossible 7. Which, for me, there's elements from all those movies that I absolutely love, and I love that they were able to bring that back into the Mission Impossible franchise within Final Reckoning. And not just bring in that tone, but also aspects, story points, development points, things from there that really much come to pay off in the Final Reckoning. Things that they never really even needed to explain, touch on, or any of that aspect, but it all comes down to this. Some people might not like that. Some people might love it. For me, absolutely adored what they were able to do with this franchise and the fact that they were able to bring that to light. The Final Reckoning for me also, like, while it is 3 hours long, I, for the most part, did not feel it. I liked the little bit of overly melodramaticness that Dead Reckoning kind of brought into here, and I think Final Reckoning continues that. I think the AI is a very unique tool and something interesting. If I were to give this, the only reason it's not up higher is also the villain. I feel like they could have done a little bit more with Gabriel personally, but that's about it. Other than that, I think this also features 2 of the best stunts in the entire franchise, if not the best stunt of the entire franchise, which I'll talk about in a second, and the best fight choreograph yet. They're so visceral. They're so violent. They're, in a way, very gnarly. And I think if this was R-rated, it would have gone even a little bit further. But the cabin scene, I absolutely loved. I also loved the submarine fight scene too. Like, all these little avenues just kind of play off. And I was just so on the edge of my seat with what Ethan Hunt was trying to succeed and do. But second, as I mentioned, those stunts. And what I was blown away with is that most of the time when I've seen these films, I could figure out how they accomplished a stunt. But the 2 stunts in here, first off, are absolutely long and never boring. But the first one is the submarine dive, which clearly they did not place a submarine under the sea. At least I don't think they did. And, like, everything that was going on. So a lot of that was CGI heavy. And while I could maybe in my head put together how they did it, it's still massively impressive how I was holding my breath, how I was on the edge of my seat. But second, the plane sequence. I have no idea how they filmed that. I have no idea how you direct that. I have no idea how you even make that. But for me, it was, hands down, the best sequence in the Mission Impossible franchise. I love that sequence so much, and I love the ending. And like I said, this is a very emotional film. There's a couple things I would have liked to have seen, and they didn't happen, and that's okay. But I never felt unsatisfied. I never felt like something was taken away from me. I always felt this is the right direction. And whether I agree or disagree with some of the choices, I loved them. And I think this is Tom Cruise, a great performance. Haley Atwell's great. Simon Pegg's great. Freaking Ving Rhames as Luther, perfect. His monologue in here is excellent. Pom Klementieff is absolutely underrated. I would love to see more of her in this franchise. I think it's a travesty that her and Haley Atwell joined so late into the franchise because they're so enjoyable. but really much enough. I absolutely love this movie, and I think you will as well if you haven't seen it yet. Now we get to my number 4, and that's Mission Impossible 3. I think some people either love, hate, or don't like this movie at all, but for me, I love this one. This is actually one that I didn't see till I think after Dead Reckoning, or maybe like a little bit before Fallout. I can't remember off the top of my head personally, but I loved my time with this. This is actually one of the few that I always go back to just once a year to just get through. I love this tone of the blockbuster. I love how J.J. Abrams revitalized this and really much harkens back some stuff to the older TV show. But this is just a straightforward action film. Like, they don't really touch on the gadgets, which Ghost Protocol very much did. This is straightforward, playing with the mask, doing all those sorts of spy stuff. And I also love, and for me, the reason that this is almost was my number 3, Philip Seymour Hoffman. Dude, holy crap. I mean, he's an amazing actor, but like, he is the best villain in the entire franchise, just on a performance level. But how personal this film is, the Ethan Hunt story, how it kind of brings in a little bit more of a personality and emotional tie to him. That is the reason that Mission Impossible 3 is so high up for me, and the reason that I appreciate this film so much. I love the action. I don't think any of the stunts very much from here are like some of the best of the franchise, but I think in general it has the highest tenacity, the highest visceralness for this franchise, and specifically high intensity when it comes down to action scenes, what's going on, the pacing, the stealth, everything to that. This feels like a spy movie through in and throughout, but at the same time giving us an emotional tie to a character that we've already, if you're watching them chronologically, followed for 2 other movies, and finally digging a little bit deeper into who he is. And I think this is the movie that for me separated Ethan Hunt from other spies and other spy genres. We get into my number 3, and I think this is where the Mission Impossible franchise really just started kicking into overgear, and that is Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. This movie just smacks so hard. It's one that the more and more I rewatch, the more and more I appreciate it. I like the opera-ness of what Christopher McQuarrie was trying to do in here, into what he was trying to revitalize into the Mission Impossible franchise. As I've mentioned, almost every single one of these turns of different directors coming in have tried to revitalize and change something into this, but at the same time always making it seamlessly through and never hearkening or taking away from what makes this franchise so impressive and so important. And Rogue Nation, in a way, is kind of a reboot to this entire franchise once again after Ghost Protocol. You have to go to that bigger length, and making the villain, first off, someone who is basically Ethan Hunt, is fucking scary, and he's a great villain. But you also add into here Rebecca Ferguson, who for me is the best character in the entire Mission Impossible franchise. Faust is for me just a character that I would have followed through for many other films, many spin-offs. It did not matter. This is one of my favorite characters personally, and I absolutely loved Rogue Nation for the way that they introduced her and introduced all these different ideas. But the reason that this comes up to my number 3 is because Benji is one of my favorite characters in the entire franchise, and this very much is an Ethan Hunt and Benji story through in and throughout. I, for me, just absolutely love the dynamic between both of those, and I like that for once we actually got a film between both of them. And in a way, it kind of reminds me of, like, taking back to video game franchise. If you ever played the Uncharted video games, each of those games very much have Nathan Drake with a character. And depending on how much you love that character may be a reason that you love that game so much. I'm in the unpopular opinion that I think 3 might be my favorite Uncharted game, but that is mostly because it's Nathan Drake and Sully's story. Rogue Nation at times may even slip into my top 2 because of how much attachment I have to Benji and how much I love Simon Pegg and, again, Tom Cruise's chemistry and how it just plays off. But alongside that, just going off to the side, the stunts in here are great. The motorbike chase scene I still think is one of the best sequences I've ever gone about in exploring and expanding, and for me, I found Rogue Nation to just be the next top tier thing that really just starts to up the ante. And when you go from Rogue Nation to Fallout to Dead Reckoning to Final Reckoning, you can really see that they really found what was their stride in working, in balancing the stunts and balancing the story and in balancing everything that you truly want to be here. And I find Rogue Nation to be a very underrated one. I see sometimes this on the lower end of people's lists, but I think it deserves a little bit more love. Get into my number 2, which is, I think, completely underrated. Again, when I see other people's rankings, they have this so low, but after revisiting it just I mean, I've watched it twice this year already, but that's Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. For me, Dead Reckoning is the culmination of so much of what makes this franchise. And I know there's been the complaint that, well, it seems like they build the stunts and then write the story around it. And I can completely see that truth to it. But it didn't bother me because I'm intrigued by this story. I'm intrigued with what Ethan Hunt's trying to do. And I find that the fact that this story all centers on this AI piece called the Entity taking control. And that's scary. I think Gabriel in here is set up as a really great villain. I think when you look at all the characters, while there is a big expansion of them, you have new ones such as Haley Atwell's Grace, which I think is one of the best introductions to a character in the entire franchise. Specifically, that whole entire airport sequence as they're trying to change the keys, and then you have the nuclear bomb that Gabriel set up that Simon Pegg's trying to, turn off. All of that is one of my favorite sequences in the entire franchise for how intense it is. And I always feel that every sequence gets more and more intense. Whether it's the yellow Fiat, like the whole car scene, car chase, freaking awesome. Then you get even into the train, the motorbike jump, all of that just is amazing. And Dead Reckoning, I never felt let the pedal off the metal. And I don't want to, I hate to make this equivalence to it compared to Final Reckoning, but I've always said this is that if Final Reckoning really paid off and made it work for me, then Dead Reckoning, the setup film, can always be enhanced by that. And since how much I loved Final Reckoning, I love Dead Reckoning just a little bit more now because I can appreciate and see where they were going for. And for me, Dead Reckoning is, in a way, the Infinity War, the all action, some story, setup, and all that, to Final Reckoning, where Final Reckoning is, in a way, the nostalgic blast in Endgame. While a little bit slower in pace, less action, it is the more special of them both. And I like how both of these are completely different movies. But Dead Reckoning, for me, I'm an action junkie. I find that the action scenes are incredible in here. I find that the performances are great in here. I really like all the setup, and specifically what was set up from Rogue Nation to Fallout to, again, Dead Reckoning and what ends in Final Reckoning. For me, this is just the perfect 4 films where you get such great character development, but also great dynamics and little hints of what really ties into the past. And Dead Reckoning is just, for me, an all-timer action movie, and I can't recommend this one enough. My number one favorite Mission Impossible movie is most likely probably also your number one Mission Impossible movie, and that's Mission Impossible Fallout. Maybe one day Dead Reckoning will surpass this for me, and it'll be a very highly unpopular opinion, but Fallout for me is just one of the best action movies I've ever come to. And I think this was the one that made me look at the entire Mission Impossible franchise as a whole and made me go, this is seriously one of the best franchises. And I really started to think that on Fallout, and then that was solidified with Final Reckoning. But there's something about Fallout that feels so different. And while, again, you have this 4-film run with Christopher McQuarrie and Tom Cruise, for me, Fallout feels like the movie that is their culmination of everything that Tom Cruise has wanted from this franchise, in terms of the spy aspect, in terms of the stunts, in terms of the story, in terms of the villain, in terms of deception, in terms of action, and in terms of Ethan Hunt's storyline. And every set piece in here is just better than the last. So even all the action sequences where you have Henry Cavill flexing his muscles in a bathroom and beating the shit out of some random guy that they need to put a mask on, but that doesn't work. For me, this just, again, hits all those levels, and it's a film that builds and builds and builds and builds and builds and does not feel for its runtime. It's the one Mission Impossible movie that if I could only rewatch one, it would be the one I would rewatch. You don't have to see any of the other ones to understand anything, but if you do, it enhances everything. Rebecca Ferguson, once again, is a scene stealer. Henry Cavill is a scene stealer. It would have continued to use him more. I think it would have been more interesting to see Henry Cavill actually be the villain going forward in Dead Reckoning and Final Reckoning, no matter how melodramatic or unrealistic that would have been. I would have personally really liked to have seen that, and I think that's the one tie-in I would have added to those other ones. And something I didn't mention for Dead Reckoning, I still am a little bit sad that they killed Rebecca Ferguson's character. She's so incredible. But Fallout is the setup to all that. Ethan Hunt, goddamn, you're a legend. And Fallout for me, just in terms of story, stunts, everything just nails it off the park. But that is my favorite Mission Impossible franchise. And as I mentioned, guys, 6 and on up, I love these movies. 7 and 8, I appreciate and like for what they are. But that is my Mission Impossible ranking. Thank you so much again for watching this. Make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. And of course, until next time, stay classy.